past, and people didn't really say what it was doing there. The Chazal, you have to understand that the rabbis who put together tefillah were mostly prophets, right? They were people who God spoke to, and they had, if it not direct prophecy, at least they had Ruach HaKodesh, they had the divine inspiration or direction to tell them what to do. And when they organized the siddur, they did it specifically according to instructions from Shemaim and their understanding based upon Pardes. So, for example, there's 4 areas of davening in the morning, of Shachris. You have what's the karbanis, the sacrifices, and the Adolam, different prayers in the morning that you get to before the introductory prayers, before the introductory psalms, which in Hebrew is called Pesukei Zimrei. And that's followed by what's called Birchas Kriyas Shema, because it's the brachas before saying the Shema, and then you say the Shema, and there's two brachas after the Shema, and then you go into Shemona Esrei. And these correspond to 4 different levels of consciousness, we're told. The first level of the karbanos is on you're standing on earth. Okay, you're down here on earth, and basically, because it all deals with everyday matters. When you first wake up in the morning, Birchas HaShachar, the brachas you make in the morning when you first get up to thank Hashem for what He's given back to you the next day, and you hope to have a good day with all these things that Hashem has blessed you with, and other things that we say at that time, putting on talis and and tefillin, etc., etc. And that corresponds to the level, the lowest level of pshat. And then you have the next level up. You're saying, Birchas Kriyas Shema, and you're going to a higher level. You're going to a level that's above the earth, but not yet the level of the angels. That's Birchas Kriyas Shema. When you say Baruch Hu, when you say Birchas Kriyas Shema, now you're amongst the angels, which is why it mentions Kadosh, 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 and things like that inside that area of tefillah, because that's the level you're supposed to be on, at that level of consciousness. I mean, it's kind of hard, obviously, first, if you know that. And second of all, if the minyan davening in goes very fast and you cannot keep up, or you're so worried about having to correct yourself, and sometimes I have to daven twice at the same time because I mess up a word, that to go back and trade, it's like it gets very hectic, very hard to focus. I mean, the real davening is described in the Gemara. The Gemara, says, the Mishnah, the Gemara talks about it, that the Chassidim Rishonim, the original people at the time of the Mishnah, they spent 1 hour preparing for davening. None of this coming up the last 5 minutes to shul, or 5 minutes after it started, trying to catch up. That's not tefillah. You don't understand what's about if you're doing things like that. And they would daven for an hour. It doesn't even say that mincha was shorter, which is normally short, but they took an hour for davening, and then an hour after davening to come down from it, to integrate whatever it's like 9 hours a day. So rightly so, the Gemara asks the question, so when did they work and when did they learn? In that question itself is a very important particular point that why the Gemara is even asking this question in the first place. But this Gemara is asked in 2 places. There's two Talmuds. There's the Babylonian Talmud, and there's the Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud, and they both talk about, because they're both based on the same Mishnayos, the same teaching. But the Gemara in Yerushalmi is more terse and will have some different things than the Babylonian, which is a more familiar one that's learned in all the yeshivas. Most people don't learn Yerushalmi, but now they even have Daf Yomi in Yerushalmi too. And there's more emphasis on learning Yerushalmi than there was years past. Art Scroll came out with their perush, their what's it called? Their learning aid for the Yerushalmi too. Incredible work, and in it, they ask the same question, So the answer that the Babylonian Talmud says is that they're, because they did this, because they daven like this. But most people today are rushing out to work, right? Because of Parnassa, they can't daven the full time. Their mind's not in their davening because they're worried about Parnassa. But the Gemara says that because they specifically learned, or they daven the way they daven, that their Parnassa was basically taken care of, and their learning was protected. It didn't go down because of the lack of time. They could pick up where they left off, because a lot of times if a person's not learning constantly with hasmada, constantly learning, they lose what they forget. I mean, it's amazing with hours. I can forget what I saw this morning. I have to work very hard to remember it. They didn't have that problem because they were davening with such kavana. The Yerushalmi, interesting enough, says differently. It says not only did their parnassus get taken care of, but that their learning was blessed. It's better than the Babylon. The Talmud Bavli just says that it was protected. They didn't lose anything. But the Yerushalmi says that it even increased without the learning. That's a whole discussion unto itself. But the Rogachover basically said that's the power of learning in Eretz Yisrael. We know that it says that Ein Torah Kimo Torah Eretz Yisrael, right? A person learns in Eretz Yisrael, it's a whole different madreg. It's, no matter what people want to tell you how good their learning is in Chutz La'aretz, there are certain realities you can't ignore. And it's not just from the past, it's for today as well. You have to be really honest with yourself about what you if you want to stay in the diaspora, if you want to stay in Chutz La'aretz to learn, that's your choice. That's what Bechira is all about. But you can't pretend that it's equal to learning in Eretz Yisrael. And people tell you, yeah, but I learned better in Chutz La'aretz than Eretz Yisrael. But it's not supposed to be that way. That's not the way it's supposed to be. And you have to question why it is that way, and how emistic you are being about your approach to learning and Gashmias in general. I know you'll get all kinds of discussions about this and arguments, and people take it very passionately. But at the end of the day, there's a Yetzer Hara, and you have to know how much is you and how much is Yetzer Hara. That aside, the point is that that's how they daven. That's how seriously they took their tefillas, and as a result of that, their whole consciousness, their whole reality was different, and it allowed them to be masliach and to relate to the world on a much higher level. But what's also important, is the fact that these levels of learning Torah, that they allude to levels of consciousness because of the fact that I didn't finish that previous point. So you're going from level that to the Birchas Kriya Shema, and then finally to Shmona Esrei, and literally you're on a high such a high. Well, let's take a step back and define some of these levels a bit more. There are 5 levels of consciousness theoretically open to mankind. The truth is the top 2 levels, ever since Adam got banished from the Garden of Eden, have basically been off limits and will not be available to us again until later on in history, to Chis Amazim onward. But we're only casting the bottom 3 for the time being, but that's already quite a lot. The names of those levels are Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, Atzilus, and Adam Kadmon, or, well, we'll come back to the point. Okay, these are the 5 levels in our world. Beyond that is just Ein Sof, and that's already outside of our realm. Even though that light comes back in and is the basis of all of existence, nevertheless, it's inside everything else. And these 5 levels are the worlds that we live in, right? The Siya, Yitzir is one level up, and then you have Bria, which is higher again, and then you have Atzilus, which is actually the level of Ayin. Now, Ayin actually refers to Ein Sof. I know those know Kabbalah, but it's also Ayin in as much as Atzilus is a completely spiritual realm. There's no physicality whatsoever, and never will be, and never was, in the level of Atzilus. So the physical world came from that. The classic statement, Yesh Ma'ayin, right? Something from nothing. Creation ex nihilo in Latin or Greek, right? And this idea is fundamental to understanding the levels of consciousness and what's going on, Adam Rishon, and et cetera, et cetera. But those are the 5. So when a person actually steps into, when they're the first level of davening, the karbanis and the bruchas, Birchas Krishma, and all that, and Hashkam Boker, all these different fields we're doing, that corresponds to the level of a Siya. That's the everyday physical world that we find ourselves in automatically. You wake up in the morning, you're in a Siya. Can't get around it. That's the level you're in, right? Then after that, if a person goes to Pezuka de Zimri, they're supposed to be entering the realm of Yetzira, the next level up, which means formation. Asiya means action, Yetzira means formation. Now, theoretically, right after that, you get to Baruch Hu, and you're supposed to take a leap up a little higher to the level of Bria. And we're talking in levels of Gan Eden here, the Garden of Eden. Theoretically, okay, if a person really doing it, the people really know how to daven and really do it properly, they can access these levels, and we'll see why in a second, right? And then theoretically, when a person steps into Shemona Esrei, they're actually corresponds to being on the level of Atzilus. which is a level of Sod and Kabbalah, and the Shemoneh Esrei is so Kabbalistic and so deep and so profound. And you know that one of the greatest proofs of that is how fast people daven it. How not seriously people take it. Because the Sitra Achra will always try to stop you where it makes the most difference. He'll always interfere. If you find yourself having to race with Shemoneh Esrei, if you find yourself not taking davening, because he knows, and he can affect you in one way, even by affecting the way. It's like these things are part of our understanding of how life works. And the fact that so few people understand, there are people who race through Shemoneh Esrei in order to go learn. And learning is all important. I cannot emphasize the importance of learning, but it's on a lower level unless you're learning Kabbalah, perhaps, right? But if you're learning Gemara or something else, it's on a lower level than Shemoneh Esrei is supposed to be on. That's according to the Rizal, according to the Zohar. That's what it says. So you're passing up a closer connection to God, a closer relationship to the master of the universe to go learn his Torah on a lower level. It's like going to the chasana of someone you really cherish. You're showing up, because you want them to understand how important it is to you to be at their wedding. And what do? You take a Gemara and you sit outside in the lobby, you learn instead. There's no question. That's an amazing thing to do, to learn like that. But everything has its time and its place. The Bala Bayis, the Bala Simcha, right? That's why there's a Gemara that says, anyone who's Mesameh Chasam B'Kala, it's like there's 5 kolas that come out. It's tied to the giving of Torah. Now you have to know what you're doing and what's going on. And this all comes down to levels of consciousness, because these levels also correspond to these 5 levels of soul, that's us. We are the 5 levels of soul. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chayin, Yechida. Nefesh corresponds to Asiya, which corresponds to Pshat. And Ruach, the level up, corresponds to Yetzirah, which corresponds to Remez, right? Or Mishnah, for that matter. And then you have the 3rd level, which is Bria and Neshama, and Bria Neshama and what's the 3rd level we're talking about here? And Drush, right? The 3rd level of learning. And the 4th level, Sod, corresponds to the level of Chaya, which is a level of soul that technically we don't access, but something it's there. It's still feeding us with divine light. Otherwise, we couldn't live. And that corresponds to the level of Atzilus. So you see how the process of going deeper into yourself, of going from level of Nefesh to Ruach to Neshama, you can't go to Chaya today, okay? But get to Neshama, believe me, you will be otherworldly completely, okay? So the process of going deeper into yourself, it coincides with the process of going deeper into Torah, and it coincides with going into deeper levels of consciousness. It's all tied together, which brings us to Torah and the mitzvahs itself. That's what mitzvahs are, commandments, and commandments are things the king has told you to do. And as a loyal subject, in order to make sure that society runs smoothly, you have to obey. If you don't obey the king, you can end up in jail. Or in olden days, they would kill you, execute you. So as a lawyer, you don't have to agree with it. You just have to do it. And if you don't agree with it, you better be pretty sure you can somehow, usurp the it's not possible here. So commandments, tzivu, you have to do it. God says to do it, you do it. A loyal servant. Plus, we know that by doing mitzvahs, we get rewarded in the world to come. And that's, of course, eternal. So therefore, do it, A, to be loyal to Hashem, and B, because it's schar in the world to come. And that one's already a little difficult for people. People don't take that so seriously. Because, and the Kli Yakar brings it, in Parshas Lechu Kusai, he brings down 7 different reasons why the Torah doesn't address the idea of Olam Haba. But the reality, the truth is that the Torah once did. Where did it go to? So, very apropos to the time of the year right now, this coming Thursday night and Friday, Bezrat Hashem, will be Shavuos, the 6th of Sivan. Zman Torah Seinu. Zman Kabbalah Torah. We're going to celebrate Kabbalah Torah, the receiving of Torah. And all of this Because without that, we couldn't have any of this. We'd just like any other nation in the world. And we're going to celebrate it because we didn't get it. We almost got it. I mean, Moshe was on his way down from the top of the mountain. He saw the golden calf and he broke the luchos. And we had to wait another, 80 days to receive a new set of luchos at a lower level, because the first set of luchos were carved out by God and written on by God. And the second set of luchos were carved out by Moshe and written on by God, which is quite a compliment. But it was a lower level. And that's the Torah we have today. But the Torah that Moshe came down with, that was after Nasav and Nishma. That was after saying we will do and we will obey, and we were immortal. We were on a higher level of consciousness. We were no longer part of this world. We were in the world, but we were quite immortal. Immortal. And because of that, that was going to be the beginning of the Messianic era. And hence, onward to Chisames in the world to come. So therefore, the Torah that Moshe came down with on the 6th of Sivan was that Torah, what we call Torah's Mashiach, and actually Torah's Atzilus, which means it's no longer addressing the lower levels of consciousness. It's only addressing the level of the Shmoneh Esrei consciousness, Atzilus. You don't have to work yourself up to it. You were in it the entire time. And that's the Torah he came down with, but he broke. So then why are we celebrating it? Because one of the questions they ask is that why did Moshe even bring them down in the first place if he's going to bring them? There's, in the history of mankind, in the history of the Jewish people, as far as I know, there's no God-fearing rabbi who ever, to make a point to his congregation about their wayward way of life, ever took a Sefer Torah out of the Aron HaKodesh and threw it on the ground and ripped it, God forbid. If it happened by accident, but not to make a point. You don't do that. It's a Sefer Torah. You want to give tochacha to your tzibur, put the Sefer Torah back in the Aron HaKodesh and give them tochacha, give them criticism. You want to punish them? Find another way. But why should the Sefer Torah suffer? Why should its kedusha be profaned by throwing it on the ground? We don't do that. There's a halacha. You can't do that. No matter how serious the sin is going to be. If God wants to destroy his Sefer Torah, God forbid, that's his business. But we can't do that. So why would Moshe take the luchos, which are carved out by God and written on by God, and break them? Why would he bring them down? Leave them on the top of the mountain. Go back and get them later on. Because Moshe understood what was going to happen. And the breaking of itself is a discussion. But the point is that Moshe wanted to take the experience of Kabbalah Torah part 1 as far as he possibly could. He knew if he didn't bring them down, we would never see them again until Yemos Mashiach. So therefore, he brought them down. We saw them. And the Pri Tzaddik says that the vision of them, because they weren't just stones being held by, in his arms, they were miraculous realities that were mashpia on you, were in such a phenomenal way that you couldn't help but change. So the Leshem explains, or Shlomo Leshem explains, that if you learn Torah on the level of the first set of tablets, not only did it change you on the spot, not only could you simply spiritually grow just from learning, and it wasn't like you learned. That's an interesting point. I need to absorb that. I need to work into my mentality. And we have things like Musar today. What do you need Musar for? They asked the Brisker Rav why because there was a Musar movement at that time, why he didn't learn Musar like all the other sectors of Judaism, Torah Judaism. He said, because I learned Gemara, and Gemara is Musar, because it was for him. That's the way he learned it. The rest of us, it's a Gemara. It's a Rishon, it's an Achron, it's a Halacha, it's a detail, but change my life because of it? No, I need Musar for that. I need to focus specifically on my character traits and work at who I am and understand. But that's not the way it was. Originally, it was a whole different story, because the Torah that you learned, Luchas Rishonas, it automatically was mashpia. It changed your mahus. It changed who you were automatically. And not just that, but everybody else around you, right? You could be learning, and your neighbor, whoa, I just got a spiritual lift. That my neighbor must be learning Torah again, or someone close by, because it would be post-shaped into the world. There'd be his spashtus of the light. It would spread. It would emanate. That was the level of the Luchas Rishonas, and we had hashpah from that because Moshe showed it to us. And the Pri Tzaddik says that because of that, we're still a nation today. that Kedusha that Moshe was able to imbue, even though he had to break them in the end. And they put them in the Aron HaKodesh because to tell us that they're there. And the Baal HaTurim explains that you can actually access the first set through the second set if you know how to do it, if you work hard on yourself to do it. So we celebrate Shavuos because there is a kesher. It was a real reality. Even though Simchas Torah is really the celebration of Torah on the level that we live on every day, and that level of Torah, of course, doesn't talk about the world to come because it's not relevant to talk about the world to come. It needs to talk about dinning. How? Okay, you made the mistake. The golden calf came, and the spies, but the gold changed everything. We stopped being immortal once again. We went back to being mortal, and now we had a Yetzer Hara back on our bodies, and now there's going to be chet. I mean, you got a Torah talking about judges and witnesses and murder. What kind of Torah is that? Not towards the Tzilas, not towards the Mashiach, because in the time of Mashiach, there's no Yetzer Hara. You don't have to talk about things like that. It's not relevant anymore. You can't do those things anymore. But our Torah addresses us on the level we are right now, but does not mean the door is closed and the country needs to work harder. It's not a gimme anymore. You have to do whatever has to be done to go from level to level to level. So the mitzvahs that we have, you'll see they divide into three categories. They're all mixed together, kind of, but they're all embedded in a story or a technical reality. But what happens if your animal happens to gore someone else's animal, which translates into a car hitting another car, perhaps? But it's all dinning. But the mitzvahs divide into three categories, and the Arizal and Shar HaGilgulim actually discuss a certain amount of them to show you how it works. But you have mitzvahs that are action-oriented. They're simply action mitzvahs. And then you have mitzvahs that are speech-oriented. They have to do with using speech. And then there's mitzvahs that are just thought mitzvahs, kavanas you have to have, like saying Shema, for example. What you have to think about as you're saying the Shema, the kavanas you're supposed to have. And even though we pass his mitzvah saying kavana, meaning that you have to have kavana for the mitzvah, but if your mind drifts during the mitzvah, except for the Shema, because that requires it, right? But if you mean to do the mitzvah, but you blanked out while you were doing it, you're still yotze the mitzvah. You don't do it again. That's obviously that's not the ideal way of doing it, because the whole point of the mitzvah is that consciousness. The mitzvahs you're doing are for that consciousness. So the action mitzvahs will correspond to a siyah, which correspond to nefesh, which correspond to pshat. They're there to help you refine your actions and make yourself into a better container to receive the light of God, to push you up, bump you up to a higher level of consciousness. There's no shortcuts. Yes, you could practice meditation. Yes, you can, and we believe that 100%. It's supposed to do, that's important. And yes, you can go out to the east and learn all kinds of yoga, and 100%. But it's got to be back in society, functioning and doing, and being a Kiddush Hashem. It's not. God didn't make us simply to be peaceful, calm, calm individuals. He made us specifically to be that way as we're functioning as members of society and building the world and really doing tikkun olam. That's the bottom line. Tikkun to ourselves and then tikkun olam. And everything about Yiddishkeit, all about Judaism, that got lost over the ages, and clearly even the time of the Beis Hamikdash, because the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, not once but twice. And we're still waiting for the third and final one. We're in exile for thousands of years, so clearly this is a struggle that we've been trying to deal with. And the whole point of the 850 years that we lived in Eretz Israel until the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed and we're exiled was to get to this level of consciousness. Because if we had changed ourselves, we would have changed the world. You might recall there's the Dvar Torah from Parshas Balak from the Shem of Shmuel, who mentions that he asked the question, why did Balak and Bilam ever go to attack the Jewish people? It was literally suicide. Jewish people weren't going to attack Moab. Bilam was from Midian. They could have stayed home and nothing would have happened. They would have read about it or watched on the 11 o'clock news what was going on with the Jewish people, but it wasn't going to affect them, not them. So why did they go out of their way to fight against the Jewish people? And he explains because they understood that if 600,000 males between the age of 20 and 60 were to cross the Jordan River to take the land and live on that land, it would have rectified the Jewish people and it would have rectified the world, and that was the end of evil. And that was in the Balak and Bilam, because you could be pretty sure that they weren't going to do tshuva, become righteous Gentiles. They would have been destroyed. So just let's get it, like, because it happened to Mashiach. When Mashiach comes, the Messianic year, the war of Gog and Magog, is to get rid of all the bad people, the people who won't do tshuva, who won't wake up, who are not going to admit to the mistakes that they made. And that's all part of the process of purification and rectification of the world. God's got his hand in the controls, and he's the one running the whole show. But in the meantime, what we have to do, what's before us, and now more than ever, because it's becoming difficult out there. I mean, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you kind of lived in your own world, did your own thing with the like-minded people, and it is you just walked in the street and people ignored you. Not everything was an issue, but not today. Today, everybody's got an opinion. People have activated by one resource or another, and it's becoming very tense. And its only premises to become even more tense as time goes on, because it's becoming more tense, because the issues are becoming stronger and heavier and hotter. I mean, yesterday there was a protest around B'nai Brak because people didn't want to accept the fact that the government is going to give money to the Haredi community to use for what? To go on vacations, to buy fancier cars, for education, for chinuch, for the poor, for bate knesses, Jewish stuff. That's what they want the money for. But they don't want that. It can't be. Even though a lot more money goes to the secular world for things that don't mean that much in the long term. And no one protests against that. And if you ask them about what they know, I just saw a clip today. There's an Arab, I forget his name. He's quite well known on his own, not because of the government, because on his own, he confronts people who are pro-Palestinian. And I saw a clip of one of his things, today. There's a bunch of them on YouTube. You can see for yourself. And he's questioning the people these are Americans in San Diego. They're not Palestinians per se. They're not even Arabs per se. They're just, took up the cause of Palestinians. And he starts questioning them about, how do you know, what's this? What was history? And he puts them on this. They have no answers. They don't know anything. Literally, they are fighting for a cause they completely don't understand. And that's going on all over the country right now. You put people on the spot. You ask them for the facts, for the details, for the things. They're just being told. They're being fed information. And they don't have much else in life to fight for. And they don't like being religious. And they don't like the people who look religious. So there's but they don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the deep. They don't care about the deeper meaning. And this is not just here. This is all around the world. This is what happens in the world every 60, 70, 80, 90 years. Before World War II, it was kind of like this as well, in different ways, but similar. And then a major war comes along, and the whole world becomes more conservative because life and death knocks us right back down to earth again. But in the meantime, it makes it difficult to live a normal life. It makes it difficult to live without hearing what's going on in the world. And it pulls you down. It pulls you in. You find yourself getting emotional. You find yourself getting, struggling to be able to stay in your own daladamas, your own reality, and because also and this is always scratching the back of my mind, that as much as God runs the world, and I'm believing that, and I'm living by this, that we know that people can do a lot of bad stuff. In the meantime, it's all minashamayim. No one's saying that it's hefker, that it's out of control, that it's random, that God's not up there going, oh, I didn't see that coming, I wish I'd stopped that. No, it's all from him. Let's make that explicitly clear. There's not one little butterfly flapping its wings because on its own. God tells it to do that. And this microbe is God controlled. So how much more so all the politics and all, it's hard to see and believe and understand how God, who's so holy, could be behind such unholy stuff. But we'll see, that those answers will come later on. Not so complicated, just complicated to explain, but the answers will come later on. But this idea of being dragged down and pulled into it and compelled to say things you don't want to say, to think about things you don't want to think about, to be affected emotionally in ways you don't want to be emotionally affected. Yeah. How do you rise above it? Well, it's not going to happen on its own. That's for sure. You just get pulled in. And that's what Chazal left us. So I mentioned one little short prayer it's not, on one hand, it doesn't stand out on its own. On the other hand, it does, because of what it represents and what it is. And you might say it in the mornings, and you might not say it in the mornings. More than likely, if you go to shul and you daven Kabbalah Shabbos with everybody else, right, you're going to say it there because it's built into the tefillah itself in Kabbalah Shabbos right before Mizmor Shabbos. Before the Chadodi, and I'll explain one in a second. But in the Hebrew, it's called Ana B'Koyach. But I'll read the English, and compared to the rest of the tefillah, it's hard to grasp what's going on over here. So it says, "We beg you, with the strength of your right hand's greatness, untie the bundled sins." Make sense so far? "Accept the prayer of your nation. Strengthen us, purify us, O awesome one. Please, O pupil of an eye, bless them, purify them, show them pity. May your righteousness always recompense them. Powerful, Holy One, with your abundant goodness, guide your congregation. One and only exalted one, turn to your nation, which proclaims your holiness. Accept our entreaty and hear our cry, O knower of mysteries." Sounds a lot better in Hebrew. "Blessed is the name of his glorious kingdom for all eternity." That last verse actually is not part of it, but what's interesting, the only place you find this entire siddur, Machzor, you name it, the only place you find this is that you see here, right, that on the over here, right, see these letters over here? Well, it's not hard to figure out if you look at the letters that they're Roshi Tevis. Roshi Tevis means literally head letters, like acronym, but each of these letters, right, there's 6 in each, there's 7 lines of 6 each, and they are the first letter of each of these words, and they're in the column. So Ana is Aleph, B'Koyach is Beis, and Gedula is Gimel, and you see Aleph, Beis, Gimel over here in the column. All the letters are there. 6 times 7 is 42. And 42, of course, now should be a familiar number because we mentioned it earlier, that the rabbis who entered Pardes meditated on a 42-letter name of Hashem to go to higher levels of consciousness. So what is this doing here? I mean, it's like poetry. It's beautiful, no question. I mean, it's really absolutely stunning and beautiful and so well written. But what's it doing here in the prayer service? Acting as a spiritual springboard to push you to a higher level. The same thing is true on Shabbos. Like Kabbalah Shabbos, right before Lecha Dodi, a very mystical time. In Tzfat, he used to go at the sun setting into the fields to greet the Shabbos queen. And it was real. He's like, but it was real, right? And it's there because that's also a springboard to a higher level of consciousness. In fact, you're going from a Siyah to Yetzirah by saying that with Kavanah. And if you maintain that, then you have a Shabbos experience. Why is malacha? Why is creative activity forbidden on Shabbos? Because it's distracting? Well, probably a little bit, but that's not the main reason why. Because the work to build the Mishkan and all the work we do 6 days of the week is only relevant to the level of Asiyah, everyday life that we live and share with the rest of the world. We work 6 days of the week. That's what we're supposed to do. And we're using these creative activities to accomplish and to rectify the world and to take care of ourselves. But on Shabbos, you go to the level of Yetzirah. It's a higher level of consciousness, 1/6 of the world to come, if you do it right. Not just, take a vacation for one day, but you focus and you go to the higher level. You go to Yetzirah, the level of Gan Eden. On that level, it says that Adam Rishon, he worked and guarded the garden, Sham v'Avda, the garden. He wasn't out there with a hoe and a hose pipe taking care of the garden. The garden was Pardes, paradise, right? Pardes, paradise. Obviously the word is the basis of the English word. That's what he was doing. He was learning Torah, and he was coming closer to Kosh Baruch Hu, and that was called protecting the garden. When he was forced out of the garden, so now he had to physically take care of a garden, which is his food and things like that, because he left paradise. That's what it was. So if you do malach on Shabbos, if you talk on Shabbos in a way, and it's hard, we're all guilty of the same idea, happens all the time, but really doesn't happen. People are very strict about this. But if you do malacha, what you're doing is you're going back down to a seer on the seventh day. You're going back down to the reality of the 6 days on the seventh day. You're leaving the reality of seer. You're leaving the consciousness of Shabbos behind. That's a geula. That's a definition. This feeling here is a way of telling us that don't just say the words. Don't just do the mitzvah. Don't just talk the talk, right? You have to. It has to go through you. All of you. The more of you is involved, the higher the level of consciousness. And here's the really important part. The more it says, someone who's makdish himself a little bit, Shemaim is makdish him a lot. If you sanctify yourself a little bit, Shemaim will sanctify a lot. You don't have to do the whole thing. You have to get started. This is steps that we take, the small steps that we take. Habala teher, mesaino. A person who comes to purify themselves, a person comes to activate their spirituality, to go to higher levels of consciousness, Shemaim will lift them up. And the world will just seem different. And you'll be strong. And we'll get to it, hopefully, Bez Rashem next time. Next week, we won't have a shir because it's their Shavuos already. It's actually already at that time. And but we'll get back to it. We'll see how that's really the basis of bitachon. I mean, bitachon is all emunah, bitachon, trust and faith in God is everything. It's everything. There's nothing else but that's what we're here to build up. That's the strength that we draw from to do everything else we're doing in this world and to transcend the mundane reality. But turns out that's also a function of going to higher levels of consciousness. And B'ezras Hashem, well, after Yanta, after Shavuos, there's a good Kabbalah Torah b'zoicha to such high madregas, and hopefully by the time we come back, because it says that the geula begins on Pesach but ends on Shavuos, because Torah is the key to redemption. So God willing, this year we'll be able to do that, accomplish that, and the next time we'll have a different topic because we'll be talking instead in Yemos Mashiach. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. Can't hear you.